I think you don't have to jump in all the way, like all in right away. You can kind of like get your feet wet, as I guess the saying goes. So you can still be doing whatever you're doing, and then just trying slowly. You're trying things fitness wise. People that don't work out, or let's say are overweight or not happy with their self image or their body, they don't have to go like all out. 2 3 hours in the gym. All right, start with you go to the store. Let's park as far as you can, and have that as an extra few minutes of walking, or go outside your office or your house and walk a few days. Get the lightest weights. Start kind of getting some kind of muscle memory and resistance in that sense. So starting from something is better than not doing anything at all, regardless of how small that starter changes.
That is Roman Prokopchuk this week on the Do It For Yourself podcast. Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome back to the Do It For Yourself podcast. My name is Ian and I am the host here of the Do It For Yourself podcast and the creator, the quote unquote mastermind behind Do It For Yourself. And each week I have the opportunity to sit down with someone who is doing it for themselves. And this is often someone who's building a business, someone who's on a fitness journey. But it does not have to be limited to those two things. I've been trying to expand my horizons on people who are doing it for themselves and line up some new and exciting guests for you here on the podcast. My guest this week, Roman Prokopchuk, is an entrepreneur who is here in the United States, but he actually immigrated here from a communist country at the time when he left. And he moved here into New Jersey from a distant relative sponsoring them. And he came over, and we really get a chance to dive into Roman's story of going through school and going through a challenging time as a young person here in the United States, not speaking the language, and really growing into the person who he is today, and growing his businesses, and growing just as a person, really. And I got connected with Roman because he had a very interesting story through his immigration and actually went on to work for the Secret Service for a very short period of time. And so I really wanted to dive deeper into Roman's story, and we do just that on the podcast today. So I'm really looking forward to bringing you this interview. And without further ado, here is Roman. Cool. All right. Well, Roman, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on to the podcast this afternoon. And I want to say thank you so much for just being so open to this. I mean, I don't know who started the thread in the Facebook group that we are both a part of, Podcast Movement. I think it's like Podcast Movement, a group for podcasters or something very generic like that. But it's somebody started a thread essentially, and it's like, hey, this is a great spot for people to network. If you are looking for guests or if you want to be a guest, network in the comments below and go ahead and set some things up. So I think you had posted a comment on there and it detailed kind of a few like bullet points from your story. And I was like, man, this seems like an incredible story. I got to get in touch with Roman. So I added you as a friend. We got connected on Messenger, and it was like, boom, you signed up for an open slot this weekend. So thanks so much for being like super on top of scheduling and everything. I'm sure, as you're well aware as a podcaster yourself, scheduling sometimes can be super difficult. And you are you can never count on having a podcast until you are literally sitting down with that person, because I've had people cancel up until 5 minutes beforehand. Sometimes I'm like sitting around waiting and it's 15 minutes past.
Yeah, my pleasure. I try to stay on top of things, and I've had the same experience where I think maybe 40% of my bookings have either canceled or not shown up or not followed up. So I try to be as, courteous as possible because I've been on the other end.
Yeah, yeah, I do appreciate that so much. So, I want to, as we were just talking in the pre-show a little bit, obviously we're gonna take a deep dive into your story and how you are doing it for yourself. But before we get into we're gonna kind of do it backwards. Before we get into how you got to where you are, why don't you tell us where you are? What are you up to? What are you doing right now?
So I founded a digital marketing agency in 2012 called Novazor Digital. So I basically run that. I also work directly for a client called Cubic Consulting, running their internal digital marketing efforts. And I've started this podcast, Digital Savage Experience, in December of 2017. So about a year and a half on podcasting. And since June, me and my wife have been foster parents. So we basically have that to keep our hands full.
That's really really awesome. The foster, obviously, being a parent in general is probably a very rewarding experience. I don't know as of yet for myself, but I can only imagine how amazing it is to be a foster parent, and what that's like. So congratulations to both of you in taking on that journey. And so, can you just explain for the listeners a little bit what your day to day looks like and what you are doing for your clients?
Day to day, a lot of follow up with vendors, talking with representatives from companies like Google, LinkedIn, Bing about accounts, about different spends from the paid search side, checking on analytics, looking at dashboards. There's all in one dashboard set up for every client because you need to see everything going on in a campaign. And having it in a centralized place really helps. So you see all the moving parts and you can identify pain points or things that you may need to tweak a lot faster. Communication, delegation of work, checking on work. So basically, kind of the gambit of tactical and management and people focused.
And so the data that you're looking at is data from what? What exactly is your company doing as a whole for these clients?
So basically, digital marketing, kind of the gambit of digital marketing. So that includes search engine optimization, paid search, paid social, organic social, content creation, and some other stuff as well. So you see metrics coming from Facebook, how many people are interacting with posts and things of that nature, paid campaigns, campaigns from Google search when you see ads, tracking organic keywords and the traffic that's bringing in. So just analyzing a lot of data points.
Okay, very good. Yep. I just wanted to kind of give everybody an idea of what your company is doing for these clients. So, the first portion of your story that I want to cover before we get into kind of how you built these businesses is that you came over to the States as an immigrant, and you came over at a very young age, and I believe you had come over with six other people. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about that. You were coming from a then communist country over into the US. And so what was that journey like? What was the first step even in getting out of that communist country and making your way over here to the United States like?
So I came here in 1990. That's when kind of immigration opened up a little bit. And basically, the process was you needed a sponsor to come over. So, a family member, somebody that basically vouched for you and took responsibility for you for the first few months in terms of if something happened financially, medically, that kind of thing. So the reason we were leaving, obviously, the state of the country, because people joke about, oh yeah, how hard or not hard it was, but the accounts of people stand in line for 4 or 5 hours for a loaf of bread, that's not inaccurate. I mean, I remember doing that with my mom, like different food shortages, water being cut off, that kind of stuff. And we went to church, so my faith is important to me, and obviously religion didn't exist in a communist structure. So if you went to church, so you had the KGB follow you around for some other stuff in terms of like religious persecution. You were sent to Siberia for a period of time on trumped up charges. My mom was supposed to be valedictorian once she graduated, but the government knew obviously she attended church and she believed in God, so they basically stripped her of that. So basically a lot of discrimination regarding of what religion you practice, but as long as you went to church and you had some kind of faith and put that over kind of the communist regime, you would be followed, tailed, that kind of stuff, and persecuted. So when the opportunity arose, we got this sponsorship and we basically left everything. And when leaving, you basically are stripped of everything. So the United States knew we were coming, but the Soviet Union basically said, you're leaving, you're not coming back. So they stripped us of the citizenship and we could only take what we could carry. So we could only take a certain amount of money and anything else that, in our suitcases, and everything else was left behind. And it was kind of this, I guess, underground railroad of immigration where coming from Eastern Europe, you would have to stop in Vienna, Austria. So we did that. Then we stopped in Rome, Italy, and then we finally came over. I was originally supposed to go to San Mateo in California, but I ended up on the East Coast with distant relatives, and I've been in New Jersey ever since.
And so, when you were getting ready to start this journey to come over here, how old were you at the time? And just the journey itself to get to the United States, what was that journey like? Was there, a very, very high stress level? I know that you said the Soviets knew that you were leaving, so it probably wasn't quite as bad as, sneaking out of a country that wasn't necessarily going to let you out. But were the conditions still not the best as well?
I mean, I was four turning five, so obviously the perspective's a little different. If you probably would ask my, parents or
Mm-hmm.
grandparents, they would have a different story. But I know Gorbachev, the president at the time, did the whole like perestroika and started kind of unwinding the grips of communism, and Ukraine got its independence in 1992. So I guess maybe there was still kind of like a uneasiness about like not being let out, like getting to the border and they say, you can't leave. But other than that, I just remember the trip itself. So, buses, trains, planes, and not, understanding languages like in Austria or Italy, and then getting here and learning English and not knowing English for, the first few months.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to ask you is, what language is your native language that you were speaking all the way on your way over here, and how many countries did you or other areas did you go through where you did not know their language? On top of then obviously getting here to the States.
So I speak Ukrainian. I mean, a lot of people in Eastern Ukraine speak Russian and Ukrainian. I understand Russian based on it being a kind of a Cyrillic language and based on off of a Cyrillic alphabet. But I spoke Ukrainian. I still speak Ukrainian. When we stopped in Austria, I guess they speak German or, a variation of, and then in Rome, Italian. So my mom can speak German, so she was fine there. Obviously, I didn't understand anything because I was with my parents the whole time and
Mm-hmm.
grandparents and my aunt. And Italian, it was just the same situation where obviously I didn't speak Italian, but I would be around my family that would communicate with me.
And so it was you and who else? I know you said your grandparents are there, your mom was there. Who what was the family that came with you?
My brother that was born in May 1989, so he was just a couple of months in the whole
Wow.
journey.
Wow.
My mother, my father, my grandmother, and my grandfather on my mother's side, and then my aunt, my mother's sister.
And who was the sponsor that sponsored you over here? Because you said that it had to be a family member, right? So somebody was already here.
Yeah, it was a distant family member. They were originally from South America because there's this weird immigration stuff after World War II. A lot of people from Ukraine immigrated to Paraguay and Argentina and countries like that. So it was someone that was in Paraguay, then moved here years back, and they ended up being like distant relatives, and they lived in New Jersey. So they basically pretty much vouched for us.
Okay. And so now I want to get into kind of your journey of starting your school here and what that was like, what it was like to come into a brand new school. You didn't know anyone. And on top of that, you did not speak the language when you got here. So, what was that like? Kind of, you just got your feet on the ground in New Jersey. And not only do you have to learn, everything about this new place that you just got to, but you don't speak the language either.
So the town that I moved to, there was a lot of immigrants from Ukraine, which was convenient, and the church that I ended up going to was a Ukrainian church. So there was a lot of kids in the town that went to the church that were Ukrainian and kind of, I guess, took me under their wing in a way. So it translated when need be in school and that kind of stuff. And I basically went right into kindergarten and started learning English. And then I moved after a year to a different town because when we moved here, we stayed with our sponsor for about a few weeks, and then basically we were left to fend for ourselves. So we had to get a two-bedroom apartment for everyone. And then a couple months down the road, we got a little, I guess, cushion that my mom and my dad could get basically our own place. So we did that and moved to the town right next to where we came to. And there I went to school to first grade. So in first and second grade, basically I was an ESL, which is English second language, and basically learned the language. I had an additional kind of class. They didn't have a English second language class to accommodate in the elementary school I was in. So they basically had to bus me to this other elementary school in the town just for this one class and then bus me back and forth, which was like a little intrusive in terms of like my education because it would disrupt my day.
Mm-hmm.
But I pretty much learned English in a year. I mean, I had a slight accent. At this point, I don't think I have much of an accent.
No,
Sometimes people
no.
say I do it, but yeah, I mean, learning a language at such a young age, your brain gets programmed to the point where it's somewhat more of a native,
Uh huh.
speaker, and you basically have the accent drop off.
But you can still speak in your native language as well. And now, so I've had a few friends who they are from. I've had friends from Germany. I've had friends from the UK. I've had friends from Japan. And so when you speak, do you get your accent and kind of like your um I don't know what the right word is to use for it. Um, but like, does it come right back to you, and as soon as you start to speak, like to your parents or your grandparents?
Yeah, I mean, it's still there. I still like you said, I speak to my grandmother in Ukrainian. My mom, when she calls, she speaks Ukrainian. If I'm working or something, I try to listen to like news in Ukrainian or watch some kind of, YouTube thing in terms of something inspirational or something related to Ukraine and Ukrainian, but I can read it, I can write it still, and I speak it without an accent because obviously when I said my brother came here when he was a baby, so he learned how to speak Ukrainian in America. So he has an American accent when he speaks Ukrainian. We went over to Ukraine one time and the people were like, "Where are you from? Canada, the United States?" Where I don't really get that when I'm over there.
Interesting, interesting. That's pretty funny. So, and like, so you learned even I mean you weren't that old when you started this whole process and coming over here, so I'm sure you still had to develop your vocabulary, once you got into first, second grade, but you didn't have an accent even with the limited vocabulary.